All right, we are live with the Jive here, the Red Delta Project podcast, where you take a fundamental approach to fitness to give you more power, control, and freedom over your healthy lifestyle. I'm Matt Schifferly, founder of the Red Delta Project and author of the books that sponsor these episodes, like Grind Style Calisthenics, Micro Workouts, and Overcoming Isometrics. This episode is also brought to you by the NOSC family of home suspension training equipment. I just did a review about a week ago or so on their new home trainer. Very lightweight, very compact, high quality device, very versatile, and at a much lower price point than most other trainers you find out there. So you can check that out on the RDP YouTube channel. So this week's topic, we're talking about this idea of going to failure. It's a very debated topic within our fitness culture. On one side of the coin, you've got people saying going to failure is necessary and essential, and you can't possibly build much muscle or make many gains unless you take it to the absolute limit. And then on the other side of the coin, you have people saying that if you go to failure, inviting things like injury, burnout, plateaus, and a whole host of like all fire and brimstone kind of stuff. So let's get down to things on the fundamental level so we can figure out what the heck is really going on and what's really, truly best for you. And the first thing we got to do is recognize that, like a lot of dogmatic approaches, you're probably worse off if you take a hard stance on either side of that debate. If we're all the way on one side or all the way on the other side, you're going to be right sometimes, but you're also going to be wrong or misapplying something a lot of other times. What we want to do is have more of a flexible approach so that way we can use each, both saving reps in the tank and going to failure as the circumstances warrant. Because sometimes each one works best for you and works against you depending on your goals, depending on the exercise, depending on the equipment you're using, and depending on where you are with the workout. Like sometimes you want to save repetitions in the tank earlier in the workout. Sometimes you may want to push it harder later in the workout. So what are we really talking about? Well, fundamentally, we're not even talking about going to failure. That's really not the topic here. I know that's the label that we've put on things, but what we're actually talking about is the degree of fatigue that we are eliciting in our workout. Are we pushing ourselves to such a high level of fatigue that we can no longer continue to do the exercise to the level that we want to do it? Or are we stopping well short of that point? That's really what we're getting down to, because there's really actually not really such a thing as objective like muscle failure. We talk about it oftentimes as if we're like, okay, going along, we're doing our reps, we got things going, and then suddenly, boom, and we hit this wall and we can't do it anymore, and that is muscular failure. But when we really peel back the hood of this whole thing, we observe that failure is a lot more subjective. There's muscular failure, which is sometimes what people refer to as true failure, where your muscles just kind of like, I can't do this anymore. There's technical failure, where you do the exercise until your form starts to break down. There's also a lot of times mental and emotional failure. I've worked with plenty of people who they say, oh, I took it to my very limit, but then they get somehow in a different emotional or mental state, and then they go beyond that limit. I'm like, that wasn't really your limit. Like you thought it was your limit, but it wasn't really your limit. I had one case, a funny story, where there's this guy I was training, and he started doing dips, and he's like, so how many do you want me to do here? And I said, 12 repetitions, do 12. And he just immediately stopped, and he got off, and he was like, what the hell, man? 12 reps? That's insane. You know I'm 52, right? And I'm like, yeah. So, like, I don't care what age you are. It's like, why are you telling me to do 12? I can't do 12. I'm 52. I've got these shoulders. I got, he's just kind of going off, and I'm just standing there like, dude, relax. He's like, why are you telling me to do 12 repetitions? Like, because last week you did 10 and you said it was easy. Like 12 is the next level I figured you'd go to. But mentally, he hit a wall. Emotionally, he was so invested in the fact of, I'm 52, I can't train, whatever kind of thing. Bang, he hit that wall hard. And I did a little Jedi mind trick on him the next week, where instead of telling him rep numbers, I did, I said, okay, 3-minute test, right? This is even before my micro workout strategies. It's like, how many can you do in 3 minutes? And he banged out 17 in his first shot. I was like, You gave me guff about 12 reps last week and you just did 17. Like, don't tell me what your limits are. But that's the thing, is oftentimes we do have these limits. So the point I'm trying to make with the story is that failure is oftentimes much more subjective, and it's specific to our circumstances. You can do bench press, right, go 225, get 8 reps and be like, yeah, and it's like, that's failure. Yeah, well, you strip off 245s on each end and you can keep going. Like, it's not failure, it's just failure at that weight, at that speed, at that body position, sort of thing. So it's very much a subjective thing, which is why I want to break down this idea that it's such an objective thing. Because if we recognize it's not so objective, now we've got freedom and flexibility to play around with stuff. If we take this hardline stance of it's good, it's bad, we're screwed. Because in either of those cases, you're going to be wrong sometimes. And especially as coaches, for you coaches and trainers out there, being dogmatic is one of the worst things you can do for your clients, because it's our job to recognize when certain things are appropriate for the client and when they're not. But when we're dogmatic and we're like, this is the exercise we have to do, this is the way we have to train, this is the way we have to eat, then you're coming to the things with that hammer saying, everything's a nail, I don't care. Like, but it's a Phillips head screwdriver. I don't care, I'm treating it like a nail. That's being a bad coach and a trainer. We have to recognize when our tools are appropriate. So let's talk about that. When is pushing yourself to that super high level of fatigue appropriate? And when do you want to save some in the tank? Well, think about like a lot of your exercises and workout strategies as a way to use and manage that fatigue. Sometimes you want that. Now, as it currently stands, and my understanding of the research and stuff is that heavy muscular fatigue is, so far as we know in the research, heavily correlated with a stimulus and a primary driver for creating hypertrophy and building muscle. So basically, like, if you want to build muscle and get the best chance of building that muscle, you want to drive that muscle to a very high state of fatigue. And that's why I often use the phrase state of high fatigue, because I want you to invite this idea that failure is more subjective, because one of the things that goes against it is when we say I can only do 12 reps, like that guy on the dips, we are imposing a self-imposed mental limitation. I hit 12 and I'm done. But if I say high fatigue, that's a lot more open-ended, because the more you hit those limits, the more you reinforce them mentally and emotionally. But if you say high fatigue, it's like, well, sometimes I can do more, sometimes I can do less. Circumstances are always a little bit different. Anyway, back on track. So when we are training and we're like, I want muscle, I want to stimulate hypertrophy, we want to make sure that pushing our muscles to a high degree of fatigue, really pushing them towards failure, is part of the game plan. You're just going to have, so far as we understand the science, more of a chance if you can do that. Now, you don't have to do that all the time. I'm just saying to some degree, right? On the other hand, sometimes you want to pace yourself. Sometimes you want to save a little bit in the tank, particularly if your ability to perform needs to be maintained. Now, a case in point is some of you out there are not so much interested in hypertrophy, you're more interested in building strength or skill, like in the calisthenics community. We got those, quote, skills, right? Now, one of the detriments that comes with fatigue is that it requires more recovery and you tire out faster. So you just cannot perform at a higher level if you're tired. It's just physiologically impossible. So if you're saying, I've got to be able to do this muscle up 50 times, or I got to practice this thing 20 minutes or so, you don't want to burn your muscles out super quick and fast, because in 5 minutes you'd be like, well, I can't really do this thing to the level I want to do it anymore because I'm just tired. The muscles are fatigued. It's because I pushed them too hard initially. It's like sprinting that first mile of a marathon, and then the rest of it you're just barely hanging on or not even able to finish the marathon because you put too much intensity into that first mile. So it's basically down to push yourself versus pacing yourself. Which one is best? And it comes down to, well, do you need to last, or can you really drive it into the ground? Another consideration is, what's the safety implications? Now, I'm not saying like, oh, if you go to failure, you're gonna like kill your muscles and your joints and stuff. It depends on the exercises. Some things are safer and easier to push to a high fatigue with relative low risk to detrimental results. And basically, it's something that you can think of, like, what exercises are still safe even as your form deteriorates? And which exercises do you need really good form in order to maintain the structural integrity of like your spine and things like that? So case in point, especially for me, right? It was like deadlifts back in the day. I used to do all sorts of CrossFit-y kind of movements and stuff. Like how many deadlifts can I do in 3 minutes and stuff? And it always screwed up my back because eventually I just got to the point where I was so fatigued, I couldn't do the exercise in a very safe manner. Bent over rows were another example. For the longest time, bent over rows were my go-to pulling exercise. And I would basically push myself as much as I could until the form started to break down. However, some things are a lot easier to push. Like when I got into calisthenics and I was doing bodyweight rows on rings and stuff, I was like, oh, I can really push a hell of a lot harder doing rows on rings because I don't have to keep that true structural integrity. And if my hips start wobbling around and my back starts bending a little bit, it's still perfectly okay. I'm all right with that because it's not like my spine is at risk of injury just because it's moving a little bit more because I'm getting tired, sort of thing. So just things to consider and think about. So I used to know a coach who his MO was you don't go to failure on things that have a high consequence when the form breaks down. And he had a general idea of looking at it as like barbell work is for strength, never for hypertrophy, which meant basically is like, I don't want you ever going even close to failure on anything with a barbell. Because his approach was that, well, when form starts to break down on a barbell, that's when things start to go hooey and crazy. But so he would have someone do like, you know, squats, barbell back squat or something, or bench press or something. Then immediately after, he's like, push-ups, go. And he would just drive them into the ground with the push-up because it's like, I don't care what your form does on push-ups, you're fine. Or band presses or whatever. It's like, what kind of exercise can you royally screw up because you're so burned out and fatigued, but still be relatively safe? Those were his, quote, hypertrophy exercises because you could push it into that fatigue zone. Versus the things that were strength stuff where it's like you want to be very strong, but you want to stop well before you get too fatigued. So that was kind of his approach. I thought he was crazy at the time. It's like, of course you could build muscle with a barbell. Now I see what he was talking about. I should have listened. I would have learned something. So just things to consider. It's not about failure. It's not about the building or not about are you pushing yourself. It's basically when is it a good time to push versus what is a good time to kind of pace. You want to pace yourself, don't use failure too much. It's not a smart play. You want to push yourself, then push yourself, but do it in a smart way. Use both of them in the appropriate situations, in the appropriate circumstances, for the appropriate goals, and then you'll be able to get out of the dogmatic approach and mindset of it's good, it's bad, in which case you're screwed sooner or later either way. Okay, so that's the whole take I have now on going to failure and stuff. Grind style calisthenics makes really smart use of this, in my humble opinion, where we'll have our strength phase, where we stay well away from failure for that one. Because it's kind of like the barbell stuff. It's like we want to go heavy, we want to be very hard, we want to make sure the muscle is working very hard, but we want to save a little bit in the tank, right? But the hypertrophy phase, those are exercises, and that's done higher repetition. Drive it into the ground. Go until you're peeling yourself off the floor or you can barely get any more repetitions. That's a good program for using both. You don't have to pick and choose. You can use both and get the benefits of both approaches. Month 1 of the Grind Style Calisthenics program, which is totally free, is also down below in the description. All right, let's get into some questions here, folks. Thank you very much for coming on in. Ellen from Toronto, Canada. How's it going? Good to see you, Ellen. How are things in Toronto? DeBeek says the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah, that's where I got this from. Dreamer coming on. First question of the day here. What's up, Matt? Jeff Cavalier talked about hernia lately, and that got me thinking it is possible to cause hernia by doing calisthenics exercises like pull-ups and push-ups. Technically you can cause hernia with almost anything. I knew a guy one time who had a friend of mine had hernia from lifting a laundry basket. So it's really down to the circumstances and stuff. So yeah, you can have it, especially if you don't have any sort of strong abdominal bracing going on and stuff. And then there's genetic factors, I'm sure, involved, and past injuries that you may have. There's a number of things to consider. It's not going to be one of those things of it's going to cause it or it's not going to cause it, or you're safe or you're unsafe kind of thing. So sure, you can have a hernia from any type of training exercise, including calisthenics. However, I wouldn't be too overly concerned about it. The first thing that happens a lot of times with hernia is people will start to have a tiny little bit of pain, but they'll ignore it. And then they basically have that Valsalva maneuver, the intra-abdominal pressure. They're moving in very extreme motions, like bending backwards with sit-ups over balls and all these sorts of things. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's when it goes. It's kind of like a lot of joint pain. The doctor says, well, if you'd listened to that first little twinge and let it heal for a week, we wouldn't be having this discussion about potential surgery. So that's what you want to look out for, is just any sort of those discomforts in the abdominal area, like, oh, I was doing leg raises and suddenly I felt a little tear or a pull or something. Listen to that. Pain is Mother Nature's way of telling you that you're screwing something up. So pay attention, respect the pain, and don't try to force it. But at the same time, don't be too like, oh, I can't do this exercise, it's going to cause a hernia. It's not quite as simple as that. Thank you very much. What other questions can I answer for you folks here? I know this is Saturday is a little bit later here. I appreciate everybody coming on with your attention and stuff. And as always, if you don't get the live stream here, I always post the podcast as well. I shortened up the podcast, though, to make it a little bit easier to listen to. Just the first introductory lesson part goes on the audio for the podcast. I used to do these Q&As, but it was just too long. I found that a lot of people were not watching the Q&As. So the Q&As are here on the live replays on the Red Delta Project YouTube channel for in the live streams that you can access. And that way you can scrub and go ahead and everything like that. But on the audios, it's just the initial lesson. EV brings up a very good point I forgot to mention here. He says, I always go until 1 rep before failure. That's a good way to go, but it's also something that's very hard to judge, especially for beginners. The more experience you get with lifting, the more you have a sense of where that true failure is and how much you have left. I used to be more of an adherence of telling people when they were training, oh, go until you have 2 reps in the tank or 1 rep in the tank. But if they were more of a beginner, they would stop doing their exercise and they'd be like, okay, I left 2 in the tank. I'm like, okay, now on this one, go all out. And they'd go like 5 more. They wouldn't know really where that limit was. And oftentimes this would be more someone who is an athlete would know where it is, because athletes they've pushed themselves harder. They're used to that level. They're used to pushing themselves that hard. They know where that is. People who haven't been athletic or have been working out, we're just unaware of it. We're kind of murky about it, sort of thing. So it's a good rule of thumb of like go until you save 1 or save 2, but just kind of keep in the back of your mind of, did you really save 1? Or later on when you push it and you get like 5 more, you're like, okay, what I thought was 1 was really 5. I can probably push more than that. So just something to keep in mind with that piece of advice. I know Paul Wade talks about that as well. Trax, next question. What is the best way to train to continue getting stronger and still growing muscle? Well, you can do almost anything you want there, Trax. It's really up to you. You can use almost any kind of exercise, any kind of training methods, any kind of program. Fundamentally, it's really simple. You got to make your muscles work progressively harder over time. That's it. That's the only requirement. You need to make sure that your muscles are working either with more tension, that's your strength, or more duration of holding tension, and that'll build muscle. So if you could almost think of it, it's an oversimplification, but you could almost think of it as strength is how hard your muscles work, and hypertrophy is like how long they can work that hard. So you can do this in any number of ways you can. And don't think like there's one best way to train. There's 1,001 ways you can do this. We're going to have 1 million bodybuilders and strength athletes come out of the woodwork for the next 100 years. And not a single one of them is going to train the same way as any other one of them. So there's a ton of variance you have on this. But you want to, in general, make sure that your program has some emphasis on strength, where you're contracting your muscles really, really, really hard. So low reps, typically. And you're pushing your muscles to that high state of fatigue that I talked about. You can do it in the same workout. You can mix it up throughout the week. You can do it in a periodized schedule where it's doing strength for several weeks and then hypertrophy more for several weeks and stuff and back and forth. As long as you're getting both within a reasonable time period, you're going to get both. As long as it's not something like, well, I did strength training for like 5 years and then I did hypertrophy for 5 years and stuff. I'm probably a little more shorter on the time frame than that. Dreamer coming on, another question, if I may ask, does doing explosive variations actually make the muscle bigger, much faster because you activate the fast twitch muscles that way, or that's bro science? It's bro science, basically. I mean, yeah, that's the thing with bro science, though. People discredit bro science a lot. There's a lot of validity behind bro science. A lot of it. A lot of times the established evidence-based research is basically catching up to bro science theories, is basically what it comes down to. It's like, people have been doing this for years. Let's put it in the lab and see if it actually works or if there's actually validity to it. So explosive stuff is great, but a lot of times you hear of training methods of fast twitch fibers, slow twitch fibers and everything. This training method is more this type and that type and stuff. The research that I've come across is that training, unless you go to extremes, is always going to use both. It's really kind of hard to say you're training fast twitch primarily this way and slow twitch primarily this other way. There's always a mix between the two. You're probably going to get about the same result either way, with or without the explosiveness. So think of it more of a functional thing, right? And explosive stuff is about building explosive power. Whether or not that's going to carry over much to building muscle, I don't know. Some people will, some people won't. Again, the whole idea of how do we build muscle with exercise, as long as you got that fatigue in there, that's probably it. So you could do like explosive stuff and say, okay, push-ups, if you do it like convict conditioning 3 style, or like 3 explosive push-ups. 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay, good. Okay, shake it out. And you keep the fatigue really low for maximum power. I would say that explosive approach wouldn't be the best for building muscle because you're really managing that fatigue in the muscle itself. It's more neural. But if you were like, okay, push-ups, explosive until you don't get your hands off the floor anymore, and then just keep doing push-ups until you can't do the push-up anymore, that's going to be a totally different approach. You're still doing explosive work, but the approach is more about inducing that fatigue, and it's probably going to be a better way for building the muscle up in that regards. So let's see. Milena, hey Matt, what if I go to gym, have good workout, but on that day I don't eat any protein or very little protein? Is my hard work in the gym go to waste? Absolutely not. Not at all. We tend to think of nutrition as like a 24-hour thing. I call it the Cinderella fallacy. It's like at the stroke of midnight, like everything changes. Like, oh, you had all these vitamins and minerals in your body, and you're at 0 at the stroke of midnight. Got to take your vitamin pill in the morning kind of thing. Nutrition doesn't exist on a 24-hour cycle. If you had a big steak dinner the night before, you're still getting protein into your system because it can take a while for that to digest. And your body's always working with the protein that it's got in its digestive tract and all these sorts of things. Plus, you consider that with now, intermittent fasting is a very popular thing. People go 24 hours without any food in general, let alone protein, and they're still doing perfectly fine. So don't worry too much about that. You're still perfectly good. We want to have more of a macro perspective on nutrition. Like, how many calories do you eat in a day? How much protein do you get in a day? Think of it bigger, more broad. Like, how many calories do you eat in a week? How much protein do you get in a month? That sort of thing. Because it all evens out. You can have highs, you can have lows, but at the end of the day, your body is always an aggregator of averages. If you have a hard workout and an easy workout, then your results are going to be kind of somewhere in the middle. It all kind of balances and averages out. It's not going to be hit or miss, win or lose kind of thing on what you do on a 24-hour basis. So hopefully that puts the mind at ease a little bit. Mr. Dan, hey Matt, where can I find more element of progression than in your books? Well, and basically, if you just, the elements of progression, for those who don't know, that's my table that I created in my book, Smart Bodyweight Training. And Smart Bodyweight Training is basically my magnum opus, be all end all to everything I could think of at the time about my approach to bodyweight training. And the table of elements is what I did as an attempt to try to make progression in bodyweight training make a little more sense. Because when I started to write that book, there's a million ways you can progress bodyweight training, which is one of its advantages, because usually with weight training, they're like, well, it's weight and reps. That's about all you got. But with bodyweight training, there's a million different ways you can make a push-up easier or harder in different respects and different variants and all these sorts of things. So I was trying to make it into a cohesive system. So I came up with the table of progressive elements, which are 9 elements of aspects of technical ability that you can apply to almost any kind of training, particularly calisthenics, to make things easier or harder many different ways. Long story short, so I believe I have a video on the table of progressive elements, or progressive elements in calisthenics. If you search for it on YouTube, you should find it. And I also believe in the description of that video, I put a link to a free PDF where you can just print out the PDF of the table with each element listed down below. And that's something you can just kind of tape to your wall or have on your computer as a use of reference. That's a good place to go for it. I should do more on that. I've been re-editing all of my books. I just got done re-editing Smart Bodyweight Training, going through all that, and I really should be using this table of elements more in my descriptions and stuff like that. So I've been making a point to do that. Basically, if you go on my channel and just table of elements, or progressive elements, you should find pretty much everything I've got. Alan Gordon from Toronto. How's it going, Alan? Hey, Matt, I want to start using sissy squats, but the full range movement hurts my knees. My knees royally. Do you have any suggestions for this movement? I hear you, Alan. I mean, I used to have knee pain walking up a flight of stairs. One people look at my sissy squats now. You're like, how do you do that? I'm like, well, you build strong legs. So first and foremost, sissy squats are not about the knees. They're about the hips. Largely, because you're moving so much at your knees, you got to stabilize in your hips. So you got to make your hips really, really, really tight. So basically, think of like at the top of a deadlift or a kettlebell swing, or at the top of a bridge, glutes are rock hard. Your gluteus medius and minimus and your hip flexors, all those muscles around your hips, super, super, super tight. That way, all the force in your knees can go right up your leg and into your core. You can also change your range of motion by not letting your knees come down too far. It's usually downwards that gets people with the knees, not forwards. So think of like sit on your heels. Think of like doing a bad squat, right? When people, sometimes they'll squat and their heels will lift up and they'll sit on their ankles and their knees are still up well above the floor. That's the introduction part of the sissy squat. Start there. And then as you get stronger and your hips become more in control, your hips come lower, or your knees rather get lower, 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 forward, 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 and eventually you will have it. Hopefully that helps. Sissy squat's a hell of an exercise. Wonderful quad activator. And basically it's a body weight leg extension, only I would even argue that it has more benefits over the weight machine leg extension, because you're using your quads in a much bigger range of motion than you do. I get on leg extension machines now, and it feels like I'm half repping the thing. All right. Dominica. Hey, Matt. Great content. Thank you very much. How would you suggest to overcome possible plateaus? What you start changing first? Well, it depends on what the plateau is pertaining to. Technically, plateaus don't exist because we're always changing. The body is never static, as the old Buddhist philosophy. You're never stepping in the same river twice. You never wake up as the same person twice. There's always something different from time to time. Plateaus are more of a perception thing for us humans than anything else. But usually a plateau, bottom line, comes down to the fact that what you're currently doing, particularly when it comes to exercise, the quality isn't there, isn't good enough. People say, oh, I can only do 10 pull-ups. How do I do 11? Well, you got to make those 10 pull-ups better. So in a video I posted relatively recently about, do you have to go to a full range of motion? I talked about how a lot of times we'll do exercise and we'll notice something about our range of motion or our technical proficiency erodes throughout the set. However you're changing that technical ability, that's what you need to work on. So let's say you're doing pull-ups and you get 10 repetitions. Well, what's different about the first and the 10th rep? You're not getting as high. You're kicking your feet a little bit more. You're starting to hunch up. You're losing your breathing. Whatever is starting to fall apart, that's what you need to improve. So that's strength training plateaus. Those are workout plateaus. Weight plateaus and stuff, that also happens, of course, too. And I should mention, like, plateaus are supposed to happen. In fact, if you look at the timeline of your training career, let's say you're like starting at 16 and you train until you're, a year away from death and you get terrible cancer or something, heaven forbid, but you have like a 60-year career, you're probably going to spend about 98% of that in a plateau. We oftentimes think of plateaus as this temporary thing that's not supposed to happen. But the fact of the matter is, our bodies change and adapt. That's why we're training in order to get back to a plateau. In other words, in order to get back to homeostasis. You're supposed to be in that state most of the time. But the rhetoric in our fitness culture is always telling us that plateaus are bad. You should avoid them. They're not good for you. They mean you're not progressing. All of that is complete bunk. You are supposed to be in a plateau. You're supposed to be in plateaus for very long periods of time. You're not supposed to be having these big, huge changes to the body from an evolutionary and biological standpoint. Such big changes are actually very disruptive. And if they continue, they're actually very unhealthy. Whenever you follow any sort of an animal or an organism or a human being with a lot of these disruptions and not being able to get to a homeostatic state most of the time, that's when they are most susceptible to injury, disease, early sort of problems, burnout, because homeostasis is when you're healthy. Homeostasis is when you're able to stay alive. Things that cannot be in that homeostatic plateaued state most of the time are not long for this world. So that's the mindset we want to have. So that's why I always tell people, if you're kind of getting to a plateau, stay there. Stay there for a while, work on that quality, get yourself used to being there. The analogy that I always use, which is totally applicable, is you can't climb Mount Everest in one shot. You have to plateau your climb. You go up to base camp and you stop and you purposely stay there. Because if you don't, you will not make it to the top. You have to have these plateaus. So plateaus are not bad. They mean that you're going to survive and that you're staving off injuries. So sit there, enjoy it, but get comfortable with that position. You want to make it as easy as possible to maintain that plateau. Because once you find it's easier, like, it's used to be so hard for me to do this workout this way, and it used to be hard for me to maintain this way. Now it's gotten a lot easier. Once it gets easier, then you can start to disrupt things and start to climb back on up. All right, very good. Jacob, what are some good progressions for bodyweight row, Australian pull, if you can't do a front lever? There's tons of them, Jacob, tons of them. Again, this is where my 9 elements of progression come from. So we can look at every one of those and apply it to that row. Okay, so first and foremost, I'm trying to see if I can remember them all right here. First and foremost, though, is tension control. Make sure you're engaging all of the muscles as it should be when we're doing rows. Want to feel it in the forearms, biceps, all of the muscles in your back, all the way down to your tailbone, the back of the shoulder, making sure everything's engaged and working in as much of an even distribution of the workload as possible. Second thing is you can, of course, elongate your body, make yourself nice and long so that your legs are further out, and that way you're elongating your lever. You can bring whatever you're pulling on lower. So if you're doing them on gymnastics rings or handles, bring them lower. So obviously you're going to get to the point where you're going to rest your upper back on the floor if you get too low. But if you're not that low, you can go those lower. You can bring your feet up higher. That puts more weight on your hands as well. Sometimes it's good to have a friend hold your feet up, and then you can be like, more, and then you lift them up higher, and that adds resistance. You can cross your ankles, which I know sounds a little bit weird, but it works because the more or the less stability you have, the better. So your feet go wider, narrower, narrower, narrower. You can have wider and narrower hand positions. That makes it more difficult. You can have your hands lower. So instead of pulling to your chest, you pull lower like this. That's a good way to really make sure your lats and your back are working harder. So you're pulling lower. That's a good progression up into that front lever that you were talking about. You can always just add weight. That's a good way. Weight vest, or you put something heavy on your chest or something. That works very well. You can also just keep your feet off the ground and you do like tuck rows. That's another one. You can go with archer rows, so you have more weight on one arm, progressing up to single arm if you like that. You can also always just mix and match these things. So you'd have your body at a bit of less of an angle, so about 45 degrees, but you're going with single arm. And then, of course, you can get down lower. You could hold a dumbbell and then there. So you see, there's lots of things we can do. And this is one of the great things about bodyweight training. There's a million ways we can progress it. We're not even getting into speed, tempo, repetitions, rest periods, and one more thing I was forgetting. No, I think I covered that all there as well. So fantastic. Mr. Dan coming on with another one. Hey, Matt, how to progress after you hold a 60-second isometric hold? Do you hold longer, or is there anything else to grow muscle? Oh, yeah. You can add intensity just like any weight training or progressive strength exercise. So harder progressive holds. I don't know what you're talking about, but holding with even more intensity, put more tension in the muscle. So maybe you're adding weight. You're just contracting the muscle harder. And tension is tension. More tension is more tension, regardless of how you're making that happen. You can also go with a more advanced style exercise. So like we were talking about before, if you have an isometric row, good. Isometric single arm row. Now, there's lots of ways that you can progress that thing. But yeah, generally, like once you can do something for 60 seconds, my usual recommendation is good. Now let's make it harder. There shouldn't be a reason we're holding it like, yeah, I'm holding it for 5 minutes. I'm like, why are you making it so easy? You can do it for 5 minutes. We're here to build strength. Like let's get the intensity up high. Same sort of attitude I hold with, doing 100 push-ups and 1,000 crunches a day. It's like, why are you doing them so easy? I don't want to do easy exercise. I want hard exercise. If I want easy exercise, I just go out for a casual walk along the beach there. Tracks, next question coming on here. What's the best way to advance to the one-hand pull-up? Oh, there's a million of them. So there's a lot of, like I said, all those variables that I talked about, you can mix and match and switch and swap and up and down and left and right and create a million different variants. And so a lot of times in our fitness culture, especially on the internet, you get these ideas of like, this is how to do a one-arm pull-up or a one-hand push-up. And it's like you do A, B, C, and D, and there you go. And that almost never happens. I don't know a single person who's ever taken a progressive system of calisthenics and is like, I did it just like the book said, and it got me to where I want. Never happens, because progression is always different for all of us. Every human being on this planet could eventually be one-arm repping on those pull-ups, one-arm pull-ups, and you ask them how they did it, and every single one of them will give you a different answer. But the basics of where it's at. So generally, it's about getting really good at the two-arm version, bringing the hands in closer, still getting good at that, and then you eventually load up one arm more while there's less weight on the other, and you progress by adding more load onto that side. That's the general way to go about it. How you go about it? Whatever. Do whatever the hell you want kind of thing. Because we all have different barriers to those objectives. One guy over here could need it because his lats don't engage. Okay, you got to get your lats on. You need isometrics to do that. Why do? Oh, your grip is the weak link. Okay, so we're going to give you grip training to be able to get that up. This other person, oh, your pull-up is actually terrible. We're going to go to rows or jackknife pull-ups first. This person, oh, your core activation, your body's not stable. We're going to give you some core activation. This is what us coaches do, is we'll look at someone and say, okay, this is based on the experience I'm having from you. This is what you actually need. Yeah, but this book or this program I found online says I needed to do it this way. Screw that program. This is what you need, because I'm watching you and this is exactly what you need. You don't need to do step 9. You need to do step 3 plus this other thing that I'm going to give you. That's what you actually need. So it really is a kind of a discovery sort of thing. But like I said before, getting really good at the 2-arm, then close, and then progressing eventually to the single arm sort of thing. Excuse me. Even on stormy days, we have dry weather here in Colorado. Crazy. Hey, Matt, what's the percentage of influence on the way someone looks would you give to genetics and what to train? Oh, I love this question because I just came up with something the other day because someone was kind of asking me this sort of thing as well, because it's going to be different all over the place. It's going to be very, very all up in the air and sort of thing. So here's my formula. Success in anything in life, but especially like that sort of thing, 3 components. Component number 1, your work that you're doing. So that's your training, right? 30% of it is your training and how well you're working and how hard you're pushing yourself and all that. 30% is down to luck, just general, and we could put genetics in there. Just, you got to have the right circumstances and go your way. And the other 30% is talent and proficiency. Now, you got to have all three to be successful, because there are a lot of people out there who are very talented and they are working their ass off, and they're still going to look back and be complete failures at what they're trying to do. Think of like every actor out there, musicians. I've known tons of people in Vermont, like the upstate music scene and stuff. You are so good. You are so awesome. It's like, yeah, I'm doing so many shows and I'm so working so hard. I'm like, you're so good. And 5 years later, they're like, yeah, I had to give it up. I couldn't make it work, kind of thing. Because they just didn't get that one spark of luck, right? No matter how we've parsed this thing out, you can't work your way to success, because hard work alone isn't enough. You can't have just talent and get there. And think of Johnny Manziel. Like, he was a very talented football player, completely tanked because he didn't have the work ethic. He didn't have the ability to stay on the straight and narrow. He had too many distractions, too many demons that he had to appease and stuff like that. And a lot of it really does come down to a lot of the circumstances we cannot control, like your genetics. And I know that's not what we want to hear, because a lot of the stuff in our fitness culture is saying no matter who you are, you can be successful. No matter what your circumstances, with my program or my diet, you can have whatever the hell you want. It's a complete fallacy. There's no way you can have full control over your destiny or your fate. Human beings never had it, no matter what you're doing. So, and don't let that discourage you. A lot of people are like, oh, why even bother trying? Because if you don't try, then the chances go to zero. You want to have at least a fighting chance, and recognizing that you don't have control means you've got to put more of your effort and emphasis and take it a lot more seriously over the things you can control. So when it comes to that training, train as serious as cancer. Train very hard, be diligent, improve your proficiency as much as possible, because you're going to need every little ounce you can get in order to get what you want. Even if you have the genetic code working in your favor, you need every ounce of advantage you can have. But it's never 100%. Never, pretty well balanced, I would say. Oh, wow, old videos here. Alex is asking about my Neuromast workout videos are short and not edited, you say it in the videos, so I use them as a micro workout. Very good, Alex, very good. I need to revisit those. I haven't seen those forever. I remember I made those when I lived up in Thornton, and wow, that was 3 or 4 years ago or so. But yeah, I always am kind of back and forth about, should I make videos of my workouts like unedited so people can see what I'm actually doing? And like, it's going to be a real boring video. I don't know if people really want to see that, but we'll see. Hey, Federico, coming on. How's it going, Federico? Good to see you. Thank you so much. Hey, Matt, how would you help, help someone to find what's the best activity for them? My sister is having a hard time getting motivated to train. Yeah, that's a tough one, especially sometimes, I give the advice of like, do things you enjoy doing, do things you like to do. If you don't like running, don't run. But if you like rollerblading, go rollerblading. And sometimes people, but I don't like to do anything. I don't want to do anything at all. It's like, that's a tough one. So the first and foremost is to make sure that there's no negative emotional content around the actual objective itself, which I know sounds a little weird, but a lot of times people are striving for something that they partially want, but subconsciously they got a lot of emotional barriers between them and it. So pay attention to your speech and your attitudes. Like if you are like, I want to build muscle, I want to build strength, but then you're walking down the street with your friends and this guy walks by, is like, oh, look at that stupid, dumb jerk on steroids kind of thing. That's a little subconscious thing in the back of your mind, saying like, I'd love to be bigger and stronger, but as soon as I see someone with that, I have the venom and come out. And it's like, you don't really want it. You actually have self-sabotage there. I see this a lot with people who want to lose weight. And they're like, I want to lose weight. I want to be healthier. But then they see someone with an impressive physique on social media or someone at a party. And there's like, they just go right after the derision. It's like, anytime you're making fun of someone for having something you want, you're literally subconsciously telling yourself, fight like hell to never have that. And you'll never be motivated to do anything that gives you a chance at that. That's the first thing that I would look at when people are like, I don't want to do anything. It's like, is probably a negative around the objective itself. Because humans are pretty simple. It's like if you give someone a path to something they truly honestly want, they will love that path to at least some degree, even if the path doesn't work. This happens all the time in fitness. Like how many people have told me they want ab training? Like if I give them, it's like, we got 10 minutes left in our session, we want core training. I want ab training. You know that those sit-ups do nothing whatsoever for your belly fat. But we feel like it does, so that's why we want it, right? So if we believe that a behavior is linked in some way, shape, or form to an objective we want, then we're going to be motivated for it. We're going to want to do it to some degree. And it's that simple. So it's not motivated is either we don't want the objective because there's some negative thing, or if we're like, well, we don't want that one method. Well, screw that method. Don't do that method. Do something else. And that's where the fundamental approach to fitness comes in. Because what we need to do is the fundamental principles to get a result. You don't need any particular diet or exercise method. So if you're saying, I don't like that exercise, I don't like that program, I don't like eating this way, I don't like this diet, I don't like having to get up early in the morning, whatever it is, none of it's required, okay? You don't have to do anything. That's why I started my new video series, Do You Have To? Because there's a lot of dogmatic ideas saying you have to do this and you have to do that and you have to do this way. Basically, I'm saying, no, you don't. When you understand the fundamentals, I want to lose weight. You got to have more calories going out than coming in. I don't care how you do that. You can do any diet or exercise program you want. And usually when we become more aware of those fundamental principles, I explain in my book, Fitness Independence, down below, cheap plug. Once you understand those fundamentals, I literally tell you, do this however you want, because chances are really good, you're going to come up with a better solution than I would. So I would ask your sister, okay, you don't want to do that, you don't want to do that. What do you want to do? And just make it work to fit those fundamentals. I want to be stronger. You got to progressively work your muscles. That's all. That's the only requirement. I don't care what exercises you do. I don't care what your program looks like. I don't care what exercise techniques you use or equipment. You don't like deadlifts? Don't do deadlifts. But I want to work my glutes. There's a million ways we can work your glutes. We just made to make them work. We just got to hunt and peck and try and stuff. It's like, oh, I like, doing the kettlebell swings. Great, wonderful. We'll do kettlebell swings. You found something you like. Awesome. Because all we got to do is progressively work the muscle. Anyway, long story short, a lot of options, but again, fundamentally, make sure they're cool with the result they're going after to begin with. Sorry, I got a little heated there. Cardio again. Whoop, sorry. In the past, you said it was a great and complete total upper body workout. I've considered sticking with it. Only 2 exercises upper body days to save time. Absolutely. So I've made videos on like dips and pull-ups or push-ups and pull-ups or push-ups and rows and stuff. Yeah. Because fundamentally, all we need for the upper body is push and pull. That's all we got. You could break every exercise we do with the upper body into those 2 categories. You go to a gym with thousands of pieces of equipment, right? Every type of exercise for the upper body, and you just go through, that's push, that's push, that's pull, that's pull, that's push, that's pull, that's push, that's pull, that's pull, pull, push, push, push. And it really does boil down to just those 2 motions. So that's why I always like to keep it simple. It's like, pick something for push, pick something for pull. Preferably big compound movements, push-ups, dips, bench press, whatever you want. It's fundamentally, it's all still roughly boiling down to the same thing. But having 2 things really allows you to simplify things and put a lot of effort and intensity into it as well. When you've got a million different things, you dilute the intensity throughout the workout. And you could just switch to different things. Like this month, it could be dips and pull-ups. Good, now I got push-ups and rows next month sort of thing. It's a very simple way of going about it. Let's see. Going on a follow-up to that, though. Question on, I'm worried, though, about long-term imbalances by only focusing on vertical plane. So we're talking dips and pull-ups then. Curious what you think about this 10 years later. Yeah, I mean, imbalances, to a large degree, it's one of these things that we often do worry about. As long as you've got good balance between the fundamental movement patterns, you're probably fine. So we got push, we got pull. A lot of times imbalances are going to come up because we got too much of one movement and not enough of the other in opposition, and you're not working the antagonist muscles. So as long as you got something push and something pull in a relative balance, you're probably good. It is good to go with different angles and stuff, but again, fundamentally, you're not really using your muscles in a very different way. All right, with a row, you've got shoulder extension and elbow flexion. With a pull-up, you got shoulder extension and elbow flexion. You're not really doing anything that different, and it shouldn't feel that different. A lot of times they're like, oh, it's totally different. You're creating the difference. You're creating the difference in how you're using your muscles. But it is definitely something to be said for, yeah, mix it up, change around, and you're not going to create an imbalance in a month. You could do nothing but pull-ups and dips for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and you're not really going to create anything of a huge imbalance. Plus, keep in mind, too, that you're always going to have some sort of imbalance to some degree. Body's never perfectly symmetrical and well-balanced. There's always some little bit. It's when the imbalances become too broad that we get into trouble there. But as long as you're getting big, compound, general movement patterns in a fairly balanced way, you're probably going to be all okay. Thomas, hey, Matt. If you think one exercise per chain is enough to make progress, well, obviously it's a minimum you need. You need at least one for sure. But yeah, I definitely think so because, again, the body doesn't know what an exercise is. It doesn't know the difference between a dip and a push-up. It just knows like, oh, I got to contract my pec to, aid in shoulder flexion. It's like push-up, dip. It's like, okay. And when you've got the fundamental movement patterns down, you realize that a lot of people who do different exercises are fundamentally still doing the same thing with slight variance to it. Back in the day, like I used to go into the gym and do, like that was the first time I was like, oh, I've got all this great equipment. I got cable machines and I got plate loaded machines and I got weight stack machines and I got dumbbells and I got barbells and I got bands and I got all these things. And I would use everything I could under the sun in like a 3-hour suffer fest and be like, man, I did so many things, but fundamentally I did the same exact thing for 3 hours. Horizontal pressing, 3 sets of 10. I'd use all these different kinds of tools and equipment. I thought I was doing something different, but I really wasn't. So that's why when I tell people, oh, you want to do more exercises? Good. Make sure you're fundamentally doing something different. And so if you are like, I do this kind of pull-up and then I do this pull-up with this other grip, but like you didn't really change anything. You basically just told your body 90% of the same thing. Make it really different. So for example, heavy weighted pull-ups. Good. Next thing, I'm doing unilateral rows faster at a higher rep tempo, right? So we've changed the rep range. We changed the speed. We went from bilateral to unilateral. We changed the angle that we're working at. All that stuff together collectively means that you are still working your pull chain, but you're giving a lot more new stimulus to the body. You're not telling your body, do it again, pretty much the same thing you just did before. Now do it again, pretty much the same thing you just did before kind of thing, because that dilutes that intensity. We want to make sure we've got some quality there. But yeah, that's why I think for the most part, 1, 2, 3 at the max. Like if you're putting in more exercises than that, I'd say, why? What are you doing with that sort of thing? David Warchall coming on. I hope I'm pronouncing that name. Hey, Matt, any thoughts on doing advanced versions of push-ups on knees, to decrease body weight and therefore focus better on the technique? Do you think it would be productive in a long run? Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very good thing to do because, again, with those elements of progression, you're just advancing some elements and decreasing other ones. And this is usually how a lot of people work with their training, is much of the time when we're like, oh, I'm doing more reps. Yeah, but you're going in a shorter range of motion. Or, I literally saw this one time where someone had a dip belt on. So they were doing weighted pull-ups, but they were doing it with a band, one of those banded pull-up versions. So the band was taking weight off their body, but the dip belt was adding weight onto it. So they were kind of like canceling each other out. And at the time, people would look at that and like, that's so stupid. Like they're basically balancing each other out. They're not getting anything. But we do that all the time. It's like, I'm doing more reps, but it's half the range of motion. I'm doing one-arm push-ups, but I'm doing them on my knees. So it's not bad. I'm just saying you're taking one step forward in one way, but a step back in another way. So, which is smart, which is a very good thing to do because you're like, yeah, but I want to work on my shoulder stability for one-arm push-ups. That's a very smart way to go about it. Me personally, I've always just done it on more of an incline. I prefer to use the incline element or the angle to gravity element and bring my body and push against like a higher surface, like my bodyweight master here, as opposed to doing them on the knees. It's just, I don't know, preference. That's just the way I like to do it. And then do one-arm push-ups on a bar like this or on the back of a couch or something. So that way I'm making it easier due to the angle of gravity, but harder because I'm using a single arm, so you can work on those specific qualities for that element. It's a very smart thing to do. I like the way you're thinking there, man. Very, very good. A couple more, and then I got to run to a housewarming party. Let's get on right here. Hey, Matt, how would you get more secure with a more open grip, as if you're holding onto an edge with your fingers or flat on the ground? I worry about slipping off during pull-ups. Well, you can use elements that make it safe. So again, we're talking about how do we make things comfortable and more safe. So having an open grip on a pull-up bar, like right up there, right? But it's not so high so that if you do slip, you just pop your feet onto the floor. Elements, things that you can try. Let me see if I can't grab. I just did a review of these. These are the duonomic power holds. These things are great for improving your grip. They're my favorite new grip tool because they're adjustable and highly variable. I'll try to put a link down below in the description if you're watching this later. But you can angle these at any angle that you like, but the inside has, you know, that's strange, folks. I'm sorry about that. That cut out again on everybody. That's very unusual. I hope you're seeing me again. Did that last week. I don't know why. It's not a time limit. It happened at like 56 minutes and like 37 seconds or some weird random thing. So I apologize. I have no idea why that has been doing. But anyway, power holds. You can check them out, duonomic.com. The link is down below and stuff. But these are a great way to build that open palm grip on your finger bellies in a very safe and controlled manner. A good way to use these also is you put these on like a kettlebell or something, and you do farmer walks with them. Fries out your forearms real nice and very, very comfortable as well. All right. Everybody's like, what? I have no idea. We are back. Thanks, Gorist Fump. I do not know. It's my tech vortex strikes again. But 2 weeks in a row, that's a problem. Like I always say, when something happens once, it's like, okay, maybe it's a fluke. Twice, you're starting to develop a pattern. You got to look at patterns. And that is the word I will leave you with tonight, folks, is we were talking a lot about things that, like, what if this happens? Like, if it happens once, don't worry about it. Like, oh, if I don't get any protein in a day. If it happens once, don't worry about it. If it happens once in a while, don't worry about it. But recognize patterns. One of the most important things you can do in life, and especially in fitness, is come to recognize patterns. What's your pattern of, I don't get good sleep? What pattern? Is it in a pattern? When patterns are there, there's a reason behind it. There's consistent influences that are causing that to happen. It's not a fluke. So recognize patterns. I had a friend who had a big problem every week with over partying. You know, she'd go out, blow all the rent money on booze and stuff. She'd feel like crap, hangover the next day and stuff like that. She's like, oh, I'm sorry about that and stuff. I was like, well, the first time you did this, I was like, well, you go out, you'll drink a party a little too much. Happens. Everybody does it to some degree. That's okay. But after like 5 or 6 times, like, we have a pattern. We have a pattern. We have a problem. Or you can have a problem. You can have a pattern and be good because you're going in the other direction. But once you have a pattern, it's not going to fix itself on its own kind of thing. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to take on off. I have a party to get to, and I got some desserts that I'm bringing and stuff, so I'm sure everybody's waiting for that. But we'll be doing this again next week for roughly 2:30, 3 o'clock Mountain Standard Time here. I'll be talking about the importance of more purposeful types of training and why just adhering to specific numbers like rep and set ranges and stuff aren't always the best way to go. But thank you very much for coming on in. Come next week with your questions. You can always hit me up with questions, of course, and the Red Delta Project Instagram channel at red.delta.project if you want to just hit me up a question directly. And thank you very much. Check out links down below for all the sponsored products that helps to support the channel here. It's very much appreciated. I'll talk to you next week. Till then, be fat, be fit, and live free.